Okay, we're back again. I'm back again. And my last video was with Karen, my oldest daughter, Karen. And this time I'm talking with Karen's daughter, my granddaughter, Caitlyn. And Caitlyn lives with her mom and dad, Corey, in Casey, South Carolina. And she is 12 years old. 12 years old, and in what grade?
Sixth.
Sixth grade. So she's going to ask me some questions that she's thought about me and my younger life in my childhood. And we started this whole thing using this life story interview kit, and so we've some questions in there. And Caitlyn's looked through them, and she's pick some questions of her own that she wants to ask. So we're going to get started. Caitlyn, anything you want to say or introduce yourself or tell us a little bit about you?
Well, one thing is, I know that you're a very interesting person and that you get into a lot of different hobbies.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I want to focus on. And like, I know your hobbies now, but I want to know them whenever you were a kid, what your hobbies were.
Okay.
So that's what we'll start with. What were some of your hobbies as a kid?
Well, let's see. Mostly, I played with my good friend Skip. He liked to hunt and fish, but I wasn't much of a hunter or fisher. But I played, we played games, my sister. We played Monopoly and cards and that sort of thing. But I also like to play with the little people and animals that you get, particularly with horses. I like, of course, when I was a kid, we like today, everybody likes Star Wars and all those kinds of things. When I was a kid, it was cowboys and Indians, because all of the movies were about John Wayne, Roy Rogers, and Gene Autry, and these famous cowboys. So I like to play with a lot of the little horses and cowboys and Indians and that kind of thing. So that's probably one of the main things I enjoyed playing with, particularly if I was playing by myself. Now, if we were playing outside with others, we'd play cowboys and Indians. Somebody like play Bonanza, and somebody would have to would assign the 4 characters of Bonanza, and we'd make up stories and play those out. And then when I got older, when I was in junior high and high school, of course I played football, played sports in high school, but that took up most of my other time. So yeah, that was it. I also like to draw a little bit. I could draw. I did like to read. So yeah, that was kind of some of the fun stuff.
Adding on to that, did you ever have any pets to spend time with, or did you ever want a pet really bad?
No, we always had a pet. We always had the first dog that we had. The first pet that I can remember was a little white terrier. She was just solid white. She didn't have any other color on her, and her name was Snowball. And Snowball had puppies several times, and she'd always have them under the house, because we had a crawl space under the house, and our dogs were always yard dogs. We didn't have any dogs that we allowed in the house. So Snowball was in the yard. Also back then we didn't have leash laws or fences, so dogs just kind of ran in the neighborhood. And so we had Snowball till I was probably 13 or 14 years old. And then she got sick, and she was old and sick. And so we took her to the vet, or we actually took her to the animal shelter where they put her to sleep. And the same day we picked up another dog from my dad a man he worked with had some dogs. And we picked up Jasper. Jasper was half bird dog and half cocker spaniel. But he looked like a bird dog, like a hound. But he was born with a bobtail, which, dogs typically, you have to cut their tail off. Yeah. But this one was born with a bobtail, which was really unusual. But,
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's pretty rare, but it does happen. So we picked up Jasper that day, and he's the one that I probably remember the most, and became like my dog.
Mm-hmm.
The other one's kind of a family dog, but this one was kind of my dog. And Jasper would follow me everywhere. I remember in junior high school, we walked to school. Well, Jasper would follow me to school. And then one day I got a call from the principal's office, and Jasper was on the sidewalk outside the classroom, and he was jumping on the windows and putting his muddy feet up on the windows. And they took me out of class, and I had to go and I had to take him home. So I had to take my belt off and put it around his neck and walk him home. Well, we lived probably a mile and a half from the school, so I had to walk all the way home and tie him up, and then walk all the way back to school. And then even in high school, during my high school graduation, he got into the stands in the high school, and because we did it outside in the football stadium. And during the graduation, he was up there and he had these floppy ears. He'd flop his head, and those ears were flapping around, So, so he was probably my favorite pet, and he just went missing one day. I don't know. We didn't have. They passed a leash law, and then and we had our backyard fenced, so he had to stay in the fence, but we couldn't keep him in the fence. He'd crawl under, jump over, climb out somehow. So one day he did get out, and when he got out, he had gone. But he would actually, the mailman, he drove one of those little 3-wheel carts, and the mailman would come up to drop the mail, and Jasper would bark at the mailman, just go crazy. And so one day the mailman goes to put the mail in some mailbox. He comes back, and the dog's sitting in his cart. Jasper was sitting up in the mailman's cart, so he couldn't get in his cart. So but again, he just was gone one day. But he was kind of one of those dogs that was kind of known around town. He just everybody's friend. So but it was fun.
As a child, losing a dog like Snowball, and then that dog Jasper going missing, did that ever make you doubt in God of why He would do that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think at that age I just didn't think of it in those terms. With my faith, just always, it's like never really had much doubt. I mean, it's just always like, since I grew up, my parents were Christians, my grandparents were Christians. It was just God was always there, and so not much shook that. I mean, I had questions sometimes about why God would do things, but it didn't cause me to doubt that God was who He was and that He was there.
And did you just go to church because your parents, or did you? And if so, when did you start going for your own belief?
I guess when I was a kid, yeah, I went because my parents went. I mean, that's what that's what we did. I mean, we went to Sunday morning, we went Wednesday night. We had a prayer meeting back then, and it wasn't until I was probably in high school that I really started going because that was the thing to do. The other reason was I met your grandmother, Mimi, at that time, and her family were active in their church. And so, like a lot of young people, when I was in high school, I kind of slacked off on going to church. Had other things I wanted to do and places I wanted to be. So I kind of slacked off. And then when I met Mimi, and we started dating, a lot of our activities were around church, because they had a big youth choir, and she sang in the choir, and the choir was real active, so there were a lot of activities. So I went along with it. I wasn't in the choir, but a lot of the activities that she participated in were around church activities. So that's kind of, I started really getting active in church. And then we went on they did a choir tour one year, and they took the choir to Missouri. And in the summertime, they were there for, I guess we went for a week. And it was a week long in Missouri, and the kids taught Bible school during the day. The young people in the choir, they taught Bible school during the day in these churches, and then they would do choir concerts at night. Well, I wasn't in the choir, but the choir director he and I became really good friends, and he invited me to go along as a chaperone. So, I'm just graduated from high school. I mean, I was 1 year out of high school. Mimi was still in high school. She was a senior in high school, and he invited me to go along as a chaperone on this choir tour. It's just an excuse so that I could go. So he put me. I was in the room with the boys in the choir who were seniors at that time. So they were almost adults. And so I went on the choir tour and helped out. And it was on that choir tour is where I really made an adult commitment to Christ and to my faith. Was on that choir tour, and it was really a really heartfelt, really really deep commitment that I've tried to follow ever since. So it was an important trip for me, but that was when I, as a child, I kind of understood everything, but hadn't really made that.
You didn't realize how much of a commitment.
Right, and so after that, since then I've stayed committed to my faith since then.
And do you think that your sisters also had that type of thing?
No, I don't think they're my brother and sister, Tommy and Sue. They're Christians and believers, but I don't know of them ever having that kind of a heart commitment that I had. They've been Christians since they were children, just like I was, and I've had conversations with both of them about their faith and that they're believers, and they are believers, but they just never had that same commitment. So
and speaking of family, do you think that your home environment was different because Mima owned that daycare? Do you think it was different?
Yeah, it was different, but in a good way. I mean, it was when I was, in high school, when the daycare was still in the house. Before she moved out, she bought the little house down the street and moved the daycare down there. When I came home from school, there were like 30 kids in the house, 35 kids, and and we just kind of all pitched in and helped. I mean, there were always children around, and we always, she not only did she have the daycare, she also taught second graders in Sunday school on Sundays. So children were kind of that was what she did, And so I think in a lot of ways it made us closer. I mean, it was just part of our life. It wasn't,
you learned to,
it's, if we'd lived on a farm, farming would have just been part of our life. But we had a daycare, so daycare was just part of our life. So I never felt like, a lot of people ask me, and I have been asked about, did you ever feel like that you weren't loved because your mother had all of these other children around? I said, no, I don't think so. I always felt like her relationship and my dad's, I never felt threatened by their relationship with anybody else. I always felt loved and cared for, and And so yeah, but the daycare was I remember one time in I was I guess I must have been 19 or 20, and the daycare was still in the house, and so I had bought the engagement ring for Mimi. I was going to ask Mimi to marry me, and the table beside or the nightstand by my bed, that ring was in that top drawer of that nightstand. Well, I went in there one day and opened it up, and it was gone. And the children, when the children were there, when they took naps, she'd put them on our beds. Well, we knew one of them must have taken that ring out or something. So we looked, and we looked, and we looked, and we couldn't find that. We just couldn't find that engagement ring. And so Mama started asking the parents the next day, if their child had come home with a ring and so forth. Nobody had seen it. We just knew that had to be what happened. Well, what happened was that ring was in the drawer, but there were a pair of sunglasses on there. And one of the children had taken that ring and put it on the arms of it and closed those glasses. So the ring was kind of hanging on those glasses and was in that drawer all the time. But they'd been playing in that drawer, they'd gotten it out. And so those kind of things happened a lot. I mean, they were just, just those things with children around, with that many children around, especially, they're curious and they get into things. But we never had anything stolen or anything like that. But,
and like as a child, and whenever you were going into high school and being popular was kind of a thing, do you think that did you ever get bullied or treated differently because your house and your family was like that with the daycare?
No, not for that. I was when I grew up, my close friends, my friend Skip, and he was 2 years older. He was my sister's age, and he and I were close friends. So I always, when I wasn't in school, I was hanging out with older kids. So I was kind of really a follower. I didn't, I never felt like I was popular in high school. I was just I didn't like school, number one. I never did. I never liked school. And I was never really picked on, just kind of ignored. If you don't cause a fuss, you don't usually, nobody bothers you, And so, and then when I got, because Skip was 2 years older, and he was a year behind in school, so he was only 1 year ahead of me in school. So when I went into high school, when I went in the 9th grade, he was in the 10th. And he was there, and he was always kind of a protector. I mean, he really looked out for me. He was like an older brother, really, and kind of looking out for me. And, nobody bothered me because Skip was around, And so, which is kind of funny because I was a fairly good size. I was, and he was a little guy. He was Skip. Even today, he's about 5'3". Maybe weighs 150 pounds, maybe 140. And he was a little guy, and I was a bigger guy. So, it was kind of funny that he was kind of the protector, and he was. I always felt like he was real brave. I mean, where I was kind of timid. I mean, I didn't want to stand down. I just was kind of stay in the shadow. Being in the shadows was fine with me. Still is, matter of fact.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to be more outgoing because it didn't come natural for me. So I had to learn how to kind of step up and be more outgoing, and particularly when I got into the work world and workplace, learn how to take a risk and make sure I didn't get passed over or overlooked, and so.
Are you still friends with Skip or anybody else from childhood?
Yeah, Skip and I, I might have told this in another video, but when he was the same age as my sister Sue, which is they're 2 years older than me. Well, his mother and my mother were pregnant at the same time with me. Mama, of course, was pregnant with me. His mother was pregnant with a baby at the same time. So me and that baby were born about the same time. Well, that baby, it was a boy, and he was born, but he died. And so I just kind of always felt like Skip kind of adopted me, because that brother was not there. I was. We just lived 4 houses apart, and so we became close friends very early on, and he kind of looked out for me like a big brother would. And so we were, I mean, from the time I was an infant, he and I, started out as friends, and we were friends all the way through school and high school, and then the summer before he went into the Vietnam War was going on, and he got drafted when he was a senior in high school, and he was by the Army, and but he went and joined the Marines, and the Marines had this delayed entry program, so you didn't have to go in right away, and so he was going into the Marines in August after his senior year, graduated in May, and he was leaving for the Marines in August. So he and I went up to Pinedale Shores, which is a lake near Birmingham there, kind of a vacation place. He and I went up there and spent the whole summer up there together, and had more fun, and just that last summer before he left for Vietnam. And and we still talk now. Matter of fact, I talked to him about 2 weeks ago. And we talk to each other maybe a couple of times a year, and but when I talk to him, it's just like we talked yesterday. I mean, we just have that kind of relationship, and but yeah, we maintained that relationship, for 71 years, because he was there when I was born. So yeah, so we're still friends, good friends, and yeah, you're lucky if you have a couple of those in your life, that you maintain through your life. So even though we don't spend time together, we've built that relationship, over all the time. So, but yeah.
And from what I've heard so far, it seems like you knew like everyone in the neighborhood, and like you were all friends and could.
Yeah, our neighborhood, there were, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boys on our street that were they're all older than me. I was the youngest, but there was me, and then Skip, and then his name's Gary. Everybody called him Jinko. And his dad gave him that nickname. So it was me, Skip, Jinko, and Rodney Riddle is Jinko Clark, Rodney Riddle, and Craig Yarborough. And the 5 of us lived on Van Circle right there till I was till all the way through high school. And Skippy and I were the only 2 that spent a lot of time together. But there were plenty of times the 5 of us would be doing something, hanging out somewhere, doing something. And Trussville, where I grew up, there was the Cahaba River runs through Trussville. And it runs from Trussville all the way down to Montgomery, where it empties into the Alabama River. And but it's kind of the headwaters of that goes into there. But it's only, most of the river, most people would call it a creek, but it's a river. Most of it's only a foot deep. 2 foot deep, because it's wide. There's a few deep places, but we spent a lot of time, especially in the summertime when we're out of school, down at the river, either sometimes fishing, sometimes just playing, sometimes skipping the rocks, sometimes, just playing around the water and around the river. It was a lot of fun. And, usually Skippy and I were together. The others be there sometimes, but not near as much.
And speaking of friends, were you very close, or didn't really get along with your siblings?
Well, I was close to my sister Sue because we were close in age. My brother's 6 years younger, so we were close. But the age difference was enough that
you were never in the same school or anything.
He was just going into junior high when I graduated from high school, so there was a pretty big gap. So we were always close, and my sister Sue, we were always close. We had a lot of the same friends, because we were in a similar age group, so. Spent a lot of time with her. She and her friend Diane Glass. Diane, I have an uncle who's only 2 years older than me, Johnny. And Diane, Sue's best friend Diane, or one of her best friends, Diane, and Johnny were dating, and Johnny and I were real close. And so they ultimately got married. So we spent a lot of time, that group, Johnny and Diane, Sue, me, whoever Sue was dating, Skippy, that was kind of the crowd when I was a teenager growing up. And then Diane, who ultimately became my aunt, she had a younger brother, Eddie, and Eddie was my age. Eddie and I went to, matter of fact, I remember it was Eddie that on the day that John Kennedy was assassinated, Eddie and I were in school in the 6th grade, and I was going home with him after school that day to his house. And they let school out early because of what had happened, because of the assassination. And so Eddie and I walked together to his house, and I remember his mother's name was Jessie Lee, and I remember when we got home, she was watching the TV, of course, watching the news, and she was crying. I remember that just as clear as a bell. Eddie and I walking home, and her sitting there crying because of what had happened and the president being assassinated. But I was close to the Glasses, Diane and Eddie, and their family.
And I know this doesn't have to do with your childhood, but I just thought of this. When those types of things happen, like, for example, where and what did you do whenever 9/11 happened?
When 9/11 happened, I was working. I worked at the time I was a counselor in a drug addiction clinic. And I remember I was with a client, and somebody in one of the other offices, they had a TV. I turned the TV on, and there it was on TV. So we all went in and watched it, and everybody was just kind of amazed, And so because of the kind of work I was doing, being in a clinic, we couldn't close early or go home or anything. But yeah, that's where I was, and then of course went home and watched the news for the next 2 days. Just watching what all that transpired since then. But yeah, so that's where I was. But those kinds of things, when they happen, you almost always remember where you were.
You remember exactly
who you were with. Oh yeah, and then of course concerned about what could happen. Living in Tampa, Central Command for the military forces is in Tampa, so that's a real potential bombing site or hot spot. If anybody was going to invade, Central Command would be one of the places they want to knock out. So Tampa, the people in Tampa around the military base there were certainly really concerned, and everything went into lockdown for a few days until they, started to understand what had happened.
And
But
like speaking of lockdown, you have the pandemic. Were you ever worried or stressed about the pandemic because of your lung?
yeah,
You have one lung?
that was a always, for people that don't know, I had to have one of my lungs removed when I was 23 years old, and so anytime there's any kind of respiratory illnesses, I'm real careful about.
Mm-hmm.
And but I actually ended up having COVID, and I got over it
Mm-hmm.
and was fine. But yeah, it was a real concern for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
We just did what they told us to do. Wore a mask if we went out. Didn't go out any more than we had to. Tried to stay home. Used Amazon and other places to order food or whatever we needed, and just stay away from everybody.
And what made, why did you have to get one of your lungs removed?
They found they actually found it when I was 20, probably when I was 20. I had a physical for some reason, and they did an x-ray, and there was a blockage in the bronchial tubes that go into the lung on the right side. And it wasn't from smoking anything. It was just it's called a chondroma, which is your bronchial tubes are made of cartilage, and it was just slowly closing. That cartilage tumor was growing around the inside, and it was just slowly closing, but it hadn't closed yet. So they did surgery. That was the first surgery I had, and when they went in, they kind of looked at it and they said, "Well, we can't take it out. We can't replace the bronchial tube. We don't have anything to replace the bronchial tube, So let's just leave it alone." So they left it alone. And then when Mimi and I got married in September of '74, and December of '74, I thought I had a cold, and I was coughing, and started coughing up blood, and so I was in school at Auburn at the time, and so we went to the clinic, the school clinic. They said, "Well, coughing up blood." They said, "Well, you probably have busted a blood vessel in your throat or something from coughing." Okay. Went home, and it just kept on going and going and going. It kept coughing, kept bleeding, and so we came to Birmingham. I went to the lung doctor that I had gone to before, and they did an x-ray, and that tumor had closed or almost closed, and it just, anytime I coughed, it was forcing air through it, which was causing the bleeding. So they decided at that point that they had to do something, and they said, "Hey, we don't want to, basically it'll close," and said, "But you don't want to leave that lung organ in there if it's not working." So that's when they decided to take it out, and because of that tumor that was in the bronchial tubes. The lung was fine. So they took it out, and Mimi and I would have been married 3 months.
And whenever that happened, were you working or anything?
No, at the time, no. I was in school at Auburn, so I was going to school. Mimi had graduated from college. I worked a couple of years before I went. Well, I had gone to junior college while I was working, and so but she had graduated, and so we got married, and I was in school basically full time, and I was working at the vet school part time as a work study job, and so then when they took my lung out, I dropped out of school because of the recovery time was going to be a while. So I went to work then back. I went back to Alabama Power Company where I worked before I went to college.
What made you decide? Like, was there did something big happen in your life, or did you just decide what you wanted to be when you grew up, or did you just?
Yeah, I had always liked animals, particularly horses and dogs. It's kind of typical. And so I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so, but when I got out of high school, I went to a business college, a technical college, and took computer programming because I really wasn't sure. Didn't have the money to go to college, and so I became a computer programmer, and that's what I was doing before I went to college. And then, that yearning to be a vet, I said, well, if I'm going to do it, now's the time to do it. So I basically left my job, and Mimi and I got married, and I quit my work, and we went to registered and went into Auburn in the pre-vet program. And that's where I was when I got sick. So then after that, of course, now I'm married. I don't have a job. I'm sick, or have been sick, and so I decided to go back to work at Alabama Power Company, until I could kind of figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
And once I went back there, they were glad to have me back. So I went back to work there, and then they got a promotion there, and a career just kind of started,
Mm-hmm.
in that world, in computer programming world, and once you get started in something, then it's really hard to jump to another career path. So I just stayed with it and stayed with Vulcan 20 years. I went to work for Vulcan and stayed with them for 20 years.
I know you were born and raised in Birmingham and Alabama.
Right.
What made you decide to move to Florida? Was it a choice? Okay.
Yeah, it was work. I went to work for I worked for Vulcan Materials Company, and they're basically a mining company, and they mine aggregate, which is basically crushed stone. So gravel and stone that you take big rocks and make little rocks, and that goes into cement, concrete, and asphalt and stuff. And they're a really big company. They're a Fortune 500 company. So I worked for them and had been working for them for 10 years, and they had an opportunity to work a new division they were starting, and it was in Mexico. And so I volunteered to work for them, and one of the operations was in Tampa. And so, and we also made an acquisition in Tampa. We bought a smaller stone company, and had to go down and integrate that into our company. So that's when I moved to Tampa, was to.
And I know your job was constantly moving and flying and stuff. Do you think that had it took a toll on your kids and your wife?
Absolutely. Very, very, very big. Even when they were, I guess when I started traveling so much, your mom was probably only about 10 years old. And of course, Josh and Katie were younger than her. And so it took me away from home, and I'd go to Mexico sometimes and be for a week, 2 weeks at a time, and did that for almost 10 years. Well, a lot happens at home when you're not there for that much time. So yeah, it was a huge distraction. Probably one of the worst choices I ever made. I like the work. I like what we did and what we accomplished and all of that. But it really was a distraction. I really missed.
Because you had to miss birthdays and graduations.
Yeah, Yeah, and I could usually be around and time things so that I was around for the big events.
Mm-hmm.
It's the little events, it's just being there on a day-to-day basis and participating in family on, just sort of routine day-to-day basis, because you can make sure you're there for Christmas, make sure you're there for birthdays, but it's, you kind of go out of your way to make sure you're there for those things, but it's the day-to-day routine stuff. Like when I was in Mexico and get a call from Mimi, and there'd been a storm in Trustwell, and big oak tree had fallen on the house. Nothing I can do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in Mexico, and so she has to handle and deal with all of that, and get all the insurance and take care of the damage and all, and even problems like Uncle Josh got in trouble for because he rode the school bus and got in trouble on the bus, but I'm not there, I'm away, so it's missing those things that you really should be a part of. So
and do you think that since Josh was the only boy in the family, especially when you were gone, do you think it was hard for him to like you didn't go hunting and all that stuff that usually the father and son do? Did you ever try, did you do that stuff sometimes?
We tried to, but again, I was gone so much, and so which makes life inconsistent, because you can't. It's even hard to have any hobbies, because your hobby is your work. And then the other thing is, we tried to always remain real active in our church at the same time. Well, so when I'm home, I'm either working or at church, and then I'm at home whatever time's left. So you end up being pulled, because I was, it usually ended up being in church leadership in some way, a deacon, elder, or something. And so you're kind of pulled in that direction. You're pulled in the work direction, and unfortunately, my bad choices were related to letting those things pull me away from home, and we paid a price for that, and not being available sometimes when I should have been. So it was hard. The rewards were typically, there were certainly some rewards for me from a work standpoint, with appreciation, and I've got plaques and all that stuff from the company, and the money was always really good. We always had, money was never a problem, but what it takes away from you in your personal relationships with your family is crucial.
And in our family, we call you Yoda, and because everything, and we come to you for advice, and it's you're like the parent over everybody, and it's just you're just always there.
Well, I try to be, and I have really, since I left Vulcan, that's one of the reasons I left. I mean, when I left Vulcan, the reason I left was because I realized there were really two reasons. One reason was the stress was killing me. I mean, I was really, it really became overwhelming there at the end. And the other one was, I realized that, when I'm sacrificing, personal, my family is just not worth it. So, in that point, I decided, well, it's time that's got to be number one, and my work and church would have to be number 2 and 3, so that's changing those priorities. One thing I learned, I read a book. I think it was the one called Halftime, and the basic theme of the book is that there was a man who wrote the book who was similar to me, had worked was overcommitted to his work for a long time. And he lost his son. His son died in an accident of some sort. And at that point, the man sort of did a reassessment of his life. And he referred to it as halftime. He said it was halftime. You know, like in a football game, at halftime, you go in the locker room, you kind of look at everything, and you figure out what the second half's going to be like. So he did that, and he said one thing I figured out, he says, was I changed from my life from being the pursuit of success to being the pursuit of contentment.
Mm-hmm.
How do I live a life of being contented, you know, and that means, you know, taking care of your family, you know, taking care of not allowing things to distract and pull you away, and making sure you spend time with people because they may not be there, you know, like his son had died. So, you know, so that's really when I changed, you know, and then I really started refocusing as, you know, everything can't be about success. And how do you measure success? Well, I was successful from a work standpoint, but really a failure as a parent, you know, because I really was not giving it the effort that it needed. So you got to choose your priorities, you know, decide, okay, where do I want to put my effort, you know. I've never made as much money as I used to make, you know, so since I left Bolton, but that's okay. Oh yeah, I'm content. I'm very content with my life and where I am.
And you still are able to get food on the table?
Yeah, never had to do without. I've always had what we want. Haven't always had what we want, but we always had what we need.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so I'm, you know, really content where I've landed in life, and I've got the relationships with my children and my grandchildren that I want to have, you know, like being the yoga.
I don't have any more questions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you taking an interest in questioning. These things are get posted. I'm working on. They're actually out there now, so you can do. You can go on YouTube and just put in my name, just put in Dan Cosby, and it'll come up, and you can see the one I did with Katie and my mom. I'm working on having to do some editing on the one with Katie because I made some error. I was talking about ancestry stuff, about our family history, and I got some of the names wrong and stuff. So I'm just putting in corrections on the screen. So so that's out there to look at. So
I know a lot more about you now.
yeah. Well, when you watch
it's crazy what an hour can do.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, I think that's the thing, and the reason I want to do these things is we have we might have these conversations, but if it's not recorded somewhere, then, you know, are you going to remember it? Are you going to remember exactly like I said it? Or are you going to, you know, so, because our memories tend to, you know, fail us at times, and we don't, so that's why I wanted to do these things, was kind of get it down, so you'll know what your history was like, or what my history was like, and all you got to do is look forward. Okay. All right. Love you, kid.
Love you.
Thank you. This is Dan and Caitlyn signing off.
Bye.
Bye-bye.